What happens when a billionaire goes undercover in his own deli and discovers a heartbreaking truth? Ethan Cole had everything: a billion-dollar empire, luxury cars, and a name that commanded respect in the business world. But despite his success, something always felt missing. His company had grown so large that he no longer knew what happened in the heart of his own business. Were his employees truly happy? Were they treated well? Did they struggle in ways he never realized? Determined to see the truth with his own eyes, Ethan made a bold decision. He would go undercover in one of his own delis as an entry-level worker, blending in among the staff. No cameras, no assistants, just him, a uniform, and a new name. It was a risky move, but he knew that numbers on a spreadsheet could never tell the real story of his employees' lives. Dressed in a simple work shirt and apron, Ethan stepped into the deli. The smell of freshly baked bread and sizzling bacon filled the air as customers lined up at the counter. He kept his head down, trying to look like any other worker. But even as he greeted customers and took orders, his sharp eyes scanned the place, searching for something that numbers couldn't show: real human stories. It didn't take long before he noticed something unusual. Among the staff, there was one young man who stood out, not because he was loud or troublesome, but because he was always alone. He barely spoke, avoided eye contact, and most importantly, he never ate during lunch breaks. While others enjoyed their meals, he would quietly disappear into the back of the store. Ethan watched closely. The young man, whose name tag read Daniel, worked harder than anyone else. He was fast, efficient, and never complained. But there was something off about him. His uniform seemed a little too loose on his thin frame, and dark circles under his eyes hinted at exhaustion. Curiosity gnawed at Ethan. Why did Daniel avoid lunch? Was it a personal choice? A dietary restriction? Or was there something deeper behind his actions? As the day went on, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that there was a hidden struggle beneath Daniel's quiet demeanor, and he was determined to find out the truth. Ethan quickly realized that working in his own deli was far more exhausting than he had imagined. The rush hours were brutal, the customers impatient, and the kitchen was a relentless storm of heat and noise. By midday, his feet ached, and sweat clung to his back. Yet, none of the other employees seemed to slow down. Daniel, in particular, worked like a machine, prepping ingredients, handling the register, and cleaning tables without a single complaint. While others chatted or took small breaks, Daniel remained silent, focused only on his tasks. During the lunch break, Ethan grabbed a sandwich and sat at a corner table, casually observing the team. Some employees laughed together, others scrolled through their phones, but Daniel was missing. Frowning, Ethan glanced toward the back of the deli. Through the slightly open door of the storage room, he spotted Daniel sitting on an overturned crate, staring at the floor. His hands rested on his knees, fingers loosely curled, as if he was too exhausted to even move. Ethan debated whether to approach him, but decided to wait. Maybe Daniel just preferred solitude. But then he noticed something troubling. The young man's hands trembled slightly, as if he were weak from hunger. Why wasn't he eating? Ethan turned to one of the senior employees, a woman named Lisa, who had worked there for years. Keeping his voice casual, he asked, "Hey, does Daniel ever eat during breaks?" Lisa shook her head, not thinking much of the question. "No, I've never seen him bring food. He just disappears for a while and comes back when the break is over." Ethan's chest tightened. It wasn't normal. Something wasn't right. As he finished his own meal, he couldn't help but wonder, was Daniel skipping lunch by choice, or was there a much more painful reason behind it? One thing was certain: Ethan was going to find out. As the afternoon rush hit, the deli became a whirlwind of movement. Orders piled up, customers grew impatient, and the team hustled to keep everything running smoothly. Ethan worked side by side with Daniel, watching him closely. The young man moved quickly, but there was something off. His movements lacked the energy of the others, and every now and then, he paused as if trying to catch his breath. Ethan noticed that Daniel always positioned himself near the food stations, but never took anything for himself. It was as if he was deliberately avoiding temptation. The thought made Ethan uneasy. When their shift ended, most employees grabbed their things and left in groups, chatting about weekend plans or upcoming events. Daniel, however, slipped out alone, his shoulders slightly hunched as he walked toward the exit. A feeling of unease settled in Ethan's gut. He decided to follow at a distance. Daniel walked for several blocks before stopping near a small grocery store. He hesitated outside, looking through the window at the fresh produce. His hand slipped into his pocket, and Ethan could see the tension in his fingers as he counted the few bills he had. After a long moment, Daniel sighed and turned away without buying anything. Ethan clenched his jaw. This wasn't just skipping lunch. Daniel was struggling badly. He had seen it before. The quiet hunger, the reluctance to ask for help, the silent suffering that too many people endured. And now, Ethan knew for sure, Daniel wasn't skipping lunch by choice. He simply couldn't afford to eat. Ethan barely slept that night. The image of Daniel hesitating outside the grocery store lingered in his mind. A young man, working tirelessly in his company, unable to afford a meal. How had this gone unnoticed? How many others were struggling in silence, just like him? The next day, Ethan arrived at the deli before anyone else. He watched as Daniel walked in, his uniform slightly wrinkled, dark circles under his eyes. Yet, he still greeted customers with quiet politeness, still worked harder than anyone else. At lunchtime, Ethan decided he had seen enough. He grabbed a sandwich from the counter and walked toward Daniel, who was cleaning a table in the corner. "Here," Ethan said casually, placing the sandwich in front of him. Daniel stiffened. His eyes darted between Ethan and the food, uncertainty clouding his expression. "I'm not hungry," he muttered. Ethan saw right through the lie. "Eat," he insisted, keeping his tone light. "It's on the house." Daniel hesitated for a long moment. Then, as if the weight of exhaustion finally broke him, he slowly sat down. He picked up the sandwich with trembling hands and took a careful bite. Ethan watched as the tension in Daniel's shoulders eased, the look of relief washing over his face. It wasn't just hunger, this was starvation. A few minutes passed in silence before Daniel finally spoke. "Thanks," he murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. Ethan nodded but said nothing. Inside, however, his heart was breaking. As Daniel finished his meal, Ethan noticed how he ate, slowly, carefully, as if savoring every bite, making it last. It was the way someone ate when they didn't know when their next meal would come. Ethan had seen it before, in people who had known real hunger. For the first time, Daniel met his eyes. There was hesitation there, as if he was debating whether to say something. Then, with a quiet sigh, he spoke. "I used to eat lunch," he said, his voice low. "Back when things were different." Ethan stayed silent, letting him continue. "It's just me and my little sister now," Daniel admitted, his fingers tightening around the edge of the table. "Our parents passed away a year ago. We lost everything. Rent, bills, food, it's all on me now. So, if skipping a few meals means she doesn't have to go hungry, it's worth it." Ethan felt his stomach twist. "I thought working full-time would be enough," Daniel continued, forcing a small, bitter smile. "But some months, even that isn't enough. So I skip lunch. It's not a big deal." Ethan gripped the edge of his chair, forcing himself to stay composed. A full-time employee at his company, barely surviving. How many others were going through the same thing? How many of his workers were just one missed paycheck away from losing everything? This wasn't just about Daniel anymore. Ethan had to do something. Ethan left work that day feeling different. The weight of Daniel's words pressed heavily on his chest. A young man, working full-time in his company, forced to starve just to keep his little sister fed. It was unacceptable. For the first time in years, Ethan questioned everything he had built. He had always believed he was a fair employer, good wages, solid benefits. But clearly, something was broken. If Daniel was struggling this much, how many others were suffering in silence? That night, Ethan sat in his office, reviewing company policies. He looked at wages, employee benefits, and meal costs. The numbers made sense on paper, but reality told a different story. He knew what he had to do. The next morning, he returned to the deli, still disguised as an employee. When lunchtime arrived, he watched as Daniel once again tried to slip away unnoticed. But this time, Ethan stopped him. "Come with me," he said, his voice firm but kind. Daniel hesitated, confused, but followed. Ethan led him to the manager's office, where the deli's supervisor, Mike, was waiting. "Starting today," Ethan said, locking eyes with the manager, "every employee gets a free meal during their shift. No exceptions." Mike blinked in surprise. "But that's not company policy." Ethan's voice was steady. "It is now." Daniel looked between them, his face a mixture of shock and gratitude. Why would you do that?" he asked. Ethan simply smiled, his heart lighter than it had been in years. "Because no one working under my roof should ever have to go hungry." Ethan knew it was time to leave. His mission was complete, and he had seen firsthand what needed to change. But before he left, there was one more thing to do. On his last day undercover, he handed Daniel an envelope. "A little extra to help out," he said casually. Daniel hesitated before opening it. Inside was a generous bonus, enough to cover months of rent and groceries. His eyes widened. I can't accept this." Ethan smiled. "Consider it a thank you for reminding me what really matters." Before Daniel could ask what he meant, Ethan gave him a final nod and walked away. A few days later, the employees gathered around the deli's TV as a news segment aired. The camera panned across a corporate office, revealing a man in a sleek suit. Ethan Cole, CEO of the entire deli chain. Daniel's breath caught in his throat. "Wait, that's..." He turned to his co-workers in shock. "That's him. That's the guy who worked with us." The realization hit all at once. The man they had worked alongside. The one who had changed company policy, who had helped him. He had been the billionaire owner the whole time. And with that, Daniel understood, some people build businesses for wealth. Others build them to make a difference. And Ethan Cole had just proved which kind of leader he truly was.